Kevin Schofield is with us, political editor at HuffPost UK, hot-footing it straight from Westward, straight from Prime Minister's Questions, Kevin. Give us a flavour of the atmosphere in the bear pit today.
I mean, I've got to say, they aren't classic exchanges between Starmer and Badenoch. You know, it's not. We're not living in a golden age of politicians, if you're being honest. But I did think that Kemi was a bit better today. I mean, I've criticised her a fair bit on here since she became leader, but this might even have been her best performance today. Now, it's a low bar, obviously, and she wasn't. There was no knockout blows. You know, she didn't befuddle the Prime Minister, but she didn't put her foot wrong, really, as she has done. What did
she run with her six questions?
Yeah, so today it was mainly the main thrust of it was about the economy, and specifically the upcoming spring statement / fiscal event. She wants to call it a mini budget coming up on March the 26th with Rachel Reeves. Now, she has said it's not a mini budget. We have one budget a year now in the autumn.
Yeah.
You might have a spring statement, but it won't be all bells and whistles, tax and benefits, what have you. But because the public finances are in a mess and Rachel Reeves doesn't have as much money as she thought she would, in fact she's got no money, all the speculation is that she will use it to potentially put up taxes again, or we know that she's going to announce big cuts to welfare. But specifically what Kevin Badenoch was asking about was the national insurance rise for employers, which she described as a jobs tax, which I think is quite a good punchy way to really cut through to ordinary punters, because a lot of people are worried about their jobs. You know, if their boss has suddenly been hit with a much bigger national insurance bill and they look to save money, then their jobs could go on the line. So it's a potentially fruitful little avenue for her to.
Wasn't there a sort of more junior minister that was asked that question about small businesses? Can you really name a business that is okay with this national insurance? And he said the Co-op, which is a multi-billion-pound empire with thousands of stores. I think he cited a couple of others. It's that difficult moment when you're a minister who's not usually at the dispatch box and somebody goes, it's your turn, and you think, great, but not so great, because I've now got to answer these questions and they're really awkward and I don't honestly know the answer to all of them.
And they're rifling through their notes that the civil servants have prepared for them and the expectation of everything, and that's the one question that they get asked that they don't have
an answer for.
Which must be a chilling moment for any politician. But I think it is a justifiable question and a real issue. A lot of, as I say, a lot of employers are concerned about the cost of employing people. And if that's
a significant rise.
If that's too high, absolutely, it's huge. And you're going to look at, well, can we get by on less people, which then obviously pushes up the unemployment figures, or do you say, well, we'll put a pay freeze in? So basically that's effectively making people worse off, so they have less money to spend in the shops, and that's not good for the economy as a whole. The government's trying to grow the economy, so it's a very delicate balancing act, and thus far it doesn't look like she's got it right.
Was tariffs mentioned from Kemi Badenoch?
Yes, tangentially, and the tariff issue is obviously a big one, because for all that Keir Starmer went to Washington and got on like a house on fire with Donald Trump's far as we could tell, we've not been given a carve out on these steel and aluminium tariffs, which, as you rightly say, the government's position right now is we're not going to retaliate. The EU have said they will retaliate. We won't, because there's this potential trade deal in the offing which would take out all tariffs on British imports.
Because we don't have it's kind of interesting, the language on this. We don't have an official trade deal, do we?
Not at all.
We trade with them. We import, we export, etc.
And there are tariffs.
And indeed, but we don't have an actual deal. I mean, what's the difference there? I mean, is it about, I guess, tariffs and regulation? Because remember the was it the chicken thing?
So the chlorinated chicken, hormone beef, beef pumped full of hormones.
It's got to be better than some of the manky old chicken places I've eaten.
Well,
those late night ones where nothing's open, you've had a few jars and you think, I'll just go in there, when they pretend to be a sort of KFC, but they're not.
And there's an awful lot of them as well.
There's loads of them.
They are just everywhere. It's very popular. I've got to say, my kids love chicken. Everyone's just gone crazy for chicken.
I eat chicken nearly every day.
Whether we like it chlorinated or not, I'm not entirely sure.
Keep the flipping feathers on as far as I'm concerned. I don't care. Beak and all.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. But that's an issue for farmers as well. And at a time when obviously the government is already annoying farmers in all sorts of different ways, the farmers won't be terribly happy if all of a sudden all these American products like beef and chicken start flooding the market and much cheaper than British produce. So yeah, it's I still think we're quite a way away from a proper all singing, all dancing free trade deal. But were they to get that over the line, then that potentially could be good for the economy. Not great for farmers, but could be good for the economy.
Indeed, but it's going to be one of those things, isn't it? That, you know, here's Labour doing all of the things they opposed in opposition, not just, but I mean, passionately, emphatic, shouting in the chamber. Welfare cuts is the obvious one. You know, George Osborne and David Cameron were essentially a pair, a duo. I don't know what a collective noun is for antichrists, but they were when there's more than one. But they were that, weren't they? And you know, Angela Rayner, God knows who else. And this is evil. How can you do this? And then, of course, the reality of being in government, as Labour are discovering, it's a very different ball game. You know, you've got to do stuff that isn't that popular.
Absolutely, and it's going to go down very badly with their own voters in particular. Although I was on a briefing this morning, there was some polling, and they were saying that, you know, on the whole, the public are supportive, but at the same time, there is a British sense of we need to protect the vulnerable. So there's a balancing act there. If it looks like they're being too hard on people who genuinely cannot work because they're ill or disabled, if it looks like they're penalising them by reducing their benefits, then that could actually blow up in their face.
So you've got the welfare, they're bringing in the chlorinated chicken. I mean, the Tories were roundly attacking, you know, what do? You don't care about food standards, you evil, wicked Tories, because they're always evil and wicked when they do it. And, you know, slightly different spin when Labour do it.
It's much nicer, because there's nicer people. That's
a nicer form of stupidity, or whatever you want to, depending on where you sit. Rupert Lowe, I'm assuming, was not in the House of Commons today.
No, there was no sign of him. Although, to be fair, he is one of the hardest working MPs in terms of questions asked in the House, written questions, and just physically being there. You do see him a lot, but it's going to be slightly awkward now between him and his four former Reform UK colleagues, because, Nigel Farage has said this morning there is no way back for Rupert Lowe. And I think we already knew that. I mean, it's been pretty visceral, the hatred from both sides, really. I mean, some real excoriating exchanges between Lowe and Nigel Farage in particular.
All done very publicly.
All done very. I mean, all these things used to be done behind closed doors. You see sources close to and allies of, and now it's all just on social media.
I mean, it just used to be, you'd wait, you know, you'd turn on the TV at night, you'd wait for Alistair Burnett or Sandy Gall to pitch up
to tell you what happened.
Here's our man at Downing Street, you know, to tell us. I can't remember who the political editor was back then, but you know,
Michael Brunson.
I'd forgotten about Brunson. Brunson was great. He had the coat, didn't he? The beige coat. The almost part of the uniform over there at Fleet Street. You'd wait for those moments, and then somebody would emerge with the latest, you know, as they walked back to their car, etc. But now it's just like, just stick it on Twitter, boys. Get it on the Facebook, on TikTok.
By 9:30 this morning, there was already a full-on row in public. On Twitter, X, between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. I mean, it's incredibly unseemly. I have to say, thus far, it doesn't look to have massively affected the Reform polling numbers, although I did see another poll came out this morning from YouGov, which shows that the proportion of Reform voters at the last election who now have a bad opinion of Nigel Farage has actually doubled. So it's from 12% to 23%, I think, in the last week. So on the back of all the Rupert Lowe stuff, because Rupert Lowe does have a constituency of support within the party. So, but
I mean, there's a lot of this, you know, I keep using this sort of football analogy. It's like having Messi and Ronaldo both on your team sheet in their world, because, you know, these are big beasts. They're great speakers. They're very passionate. You tend to listen to them. You know, only a few people have that special thing. You know, whether it's a sort of Dennis Skinner, a Galloway character, a Rees Mogg, whoever it happens to be. You know, there's just a tiny amount of those MPs can do that bit. You know, when the House goes quiet when they stand up. You know, those kind of people. I mean, somebody here, this came in from from Charles, who says, I've heard this many times about Rupert Lowe, and he 46% of questions, written questions and verbal ones in Parliament were made by him, so he was doing all the donkey work for reform.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of that.
Charles says, simple answer is it's a small party. His job is asking questions. Nigel is front of house. I'd love to believe it was as organised as that, but we know it definitely isn't.
Definitely not.
I mean, this is a bloke that, of course he's got an ego, and so has Nigel, and so are, like, 90% of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
And he's a big beast. He's a multi-millionaire businessman, probably doesn't take orders too well, I don't dispute that, but neither do any of them perhaps in that world.
No, that's true. One thing I would say, the difference between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage is that if Rupert Lowe was the leader of the party, I don't think they would be polling nearly as well as they are. Nigel Farage is someone who, has cut through. Whether you like him or not, you have to acknowledge that he does have a gift for political communication that few other politicians do. Whether you agree or disagree with what he says is by the by. He's very good at getting his message across, and I just don't think that anyone other than Farage as leader would have reform where they are at the moment. So that's why it's such a dangerous moment for reform right now.
But it's a good point that was raised by an earlier texter that, that they are... Reform are going to experience that battle that Labour did, when Blair changed the party. Remember that great conference when he said that, which clause was it that had to go, given the unions?
Clause 4.
Clause 4. And, that moment that I'm moving the party this way, we've got to be more electable, and you sort of sense that, Rupert Lowe's contention, I was stopped from talking more about grooming gangs, the Robinson thing, they don't go, they referred to, I think, Richard Tice, that lot, a different kind of right wing to us, trying to move the party towards the centre, but of course in doing that you do run a bit of a risk with reform voters, because the very reason they had the appetite for reform was because they didn't do the centre stuff, they didn't swerve tricky narratives and debates.
Well, that's always the difficulty, I guess, for any party which aspires to government, as we're repeatedly told by Reform that Nigel Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister, Reform are going to win the next election. Well, you can't just win the election by speaking to your own supporters. You have to have a broad appeal to former Labour voters, Tory voters. I think maybe Lib Dems and Greens are probably just a wee bit out of reach for Reform under any circumstances. But, you can't just keep going to the right, and appealing to a pretty narrow section of society, because you have to have a broader appeal. Nigel Farage has said, one of the things that I think what Rupert Lowe's big beef today is about the grooming gangs. He says he was gagged effectively by Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage says that Rupert Lowe wanted to talk about repatriation in his speech. And Nigel Farage was like, no, we're not going down that road. So, that just shows, I think, to me, that he is looking to widen the appeal, because he thinks that would be far too narrow and far too controversial.
Well, speaking of political bigwigs and people that you look at and go, God, they're great, aren't they fantastic? Oh no, sorry, this is the Nicola Sturgeon story. Nicola Sturgeon standing down as an MSP. I kind of thought she had in my head. I haven't seen her for ages. She's announced she'll step down in 2026, saying it's time for a new chapter. I want to go off in my motorhome. No, she never said any of that, but there is one there somewhere apparently. Are they still got a motorhome? I don't know.
I think
still in the garden?
It might have been impounded. I think it was impounded, taken in by the police as evidence, I think.
Yeah. She's earned a lot of money outside of work already, 75,000 quid for her memoir. It's quite cheap, isn't it? 75 grand.
Yeah, I suppose it is. She got quite a lot of money. She was on ITV, I think, a rival channel, for the election. She got how much was it? 20 grand?
It says here 25,000.
Well,
not bad for a night's work, is it?
Although she did have to sit there and watch all those SNP seats fall to Labour.
Well, that's very true. That was probably worth the 25 grand, wasn't it?
A painful night.
Back to you, Nicola. What do you think? Oh, don't come to me again.
Exactly. But it's not a massive surprise. We once you've been, it's the same as down here, once you've been a Prime Minister, to then think you're going to spend years on the back benches, it must be just miserable. You're never going to return to the front bench, unless you're David Cameron, right enough. He became Foreign Secretary.
That's true.
Bizarrely. But, that's an exception. You're not going to just sit there.
The big exception is Ted Heath, of course, who sat there forever, didn't he?
Well, he maintained this he was in the huff for all those years because he just wanted to be a nuisance to Margaret Thatcher.
Absolutely,
didn't he?
yeah. He always sat fairly near the front, didn't he? He was on the second row.
Yeah, over the other side of the gangway. He sat on the front.
He was always sat there.
Sat there, yeah, looking thoroughly
and I can
miserable.
remember, you know, Thatcher being on the back benches for, I don't know, 6-7 months or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it was always interesting to see that move from there to there.
They suddenly just look so much smaller, don't they? They're just
incredible.
Part of the hoi polloi, and they're not.
But the other thing they do is, like, you know, when Theresa May, when she was on the backbenches, up until quite recently, of course, she would say stuff and raise, and you'd think, why didn't you do that when you were the Prime Minister?
She was much more effective, actually, once she was out of government. You know, people did actually listen to what she said, and she did make quite a lot of pointed criticism, mainly of Boris Johnson, who, of course, she was never a big fan.
Never liked
Boris. But
I guess when you've been the Prime Minister, if nothing else, even if you disagree with them, when they're on the backbenches, at least you sort of bestow a bit of experience on them. You think, well, they know what they're talking about because they've literally been there.
Yeah, they've got experience. Maybe unless you're Liz Truss, you've got like quite a lot of experience. You know, even if it's just 2 or 3 years, and people do add more weight, give more weight to what you say. But obviously, Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, I'm not in Scotland anymore, obviously, but by all accounts, she was barely has been turning up at the Scottish Parliament, so not that much of a surprise. What she does now, though, we'll have to wait and see. This police investigation is still going on.
That's still going on, of course, but, you know, there's nothing like TV companies like them more than one of the sort of travel reality shows. You mentioned Liz Truss, Lizzie and Nikki down under, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the best turn of phrase for this particular show. I don't know, but there could be something. There could be something in that. You know, in a camper van.
I would watch it.
They take the camper van
Liz
like
Truss and
Bradley
Nicola
Walsh and his son did. You know, Nikki and Lizzie do America. It's going to sound wrong every time I say it.
It is probably, but yeah, it's. I would watch it.
Nikki and Lizzie's European conquest.
How long it lasts before they are no longer speaking to each other and are is thrown out on the hard shoulder in the middle of Belgium, and the other one just drives off into the sunset.
Having a massive political row on the autobahn.
Yeah,
you know, Please
watch it,
to
but
an
I'm a bit strange. I would watch it.
I watch strange stuff too. Yeah. Not that strange though. Kevin, thank you as ever.
You're very
Kevin
welcome.
Schofield, political editor at HuffPost UK, with us on the programme.